Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. Talking about tonight's Friday slate, and in case you didn't know, Corey Kluber's been scratched now. They say hamstring strain. I say out of contention, but whatever the reason actually may be, we now have Josh Tomlin. $5,900 on FanDuel makes for an interesting play, but on DraftKings, slotted right in there at the top, right above Mr. Jacob deGrom at $12,000. So for me, I mean, that's an easy avoid. I get that it's a contrarian play kind of thing, but I mean, I'll save that for where he's half the price on FanDuel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's where I mean, it's so hard to play him on DraftKings. I mean, he's been good, but he's been more consistent than great.
Yeah, and like 9K maybe you play him, but definitely not.
Yeah, right. I mean, Severino's way up there today, too, at 9,400 on DraftKings, and I don't think he's exceeded 25 points yet. I wrote him up in the pitching pulse a little bit today, and it's like, I mean, it's really tough to play him when you're paying for his upside, basically.
Yep.
And if he doesn't reach that, then you're just paying way too much. And so it's really tough to play either of those guys on DraftKings today. I like Severino also on FanDuel. I think there's a lot more pitching options on FanDuel in the middle tier and stuff like that. On DraftKings, I mean, I'm probably going to look cheaper, if anything, than those kind of guys. But also at the top, I like Garrett Richards a decent amount in GPPs against Texas. All his peripheral numbers are great, and his ERA is terrible. So he's one of those guys that I'm going to keep playing in GPPs until he has the great game that I keep expecting him to have. Because, I mean, his ERA is over 5 in August, but his Sierra rating's under 3, his strikeout rate's over 25%. I mean, there's a ton of stuff to like with what he's doing. He just has been getting really unlucky with batted balls, and I mean, he's giving up big innings and then shutting people down for 4 innings in a row and looking great. So, I mean, the ERA has been helpful to his price because he's super cheap on both sites comparative to what he was at the beginning of the year and throughout most of the summer. He's in the mid-8s on both. Obviously, Texas has some upside, but they also can strike out a decent amount and go cold at times. So I like Richards a ton in GPPs at his price. I think he's going to be underowned even though he's underpriced.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think he will too. People perceive that Texas matchup as a tough one, and while it is a tough one at Texas, they're not a good road offense. So I'm with you there. I think that's a fine play. Another guy right near there, looking like the pitcher we saw last year, Colin McHugh. He's $9,100 on DraftKings, $9,000 on FanDuel. These guys been pitching very well recently. Finally showing some strikeout upside, 7 or more in 3 of his last 4 starts. Now facing the Twins offense that not only is the worst offense in baseball on the road, but could be missing Miguel Sano, who sat out last night with a hamstring strain. They're saying that he said that it felt bad a few days ago. So, I mean, I can't imagine that he's going to be playing tonight. Maybe he does, but if he doesn't, I mean, that's a huge bat missing from an already bad offense on the road. So I love Colin McHugh, especially if he sits.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite cash game play. He has a ton of upside for GPPs, too. I just think he's going to be pretty heavily owned along with DeGrom. I think most of the cash game lineups are going to have both of those guys. I would hope their GPP ownership goes down a little bit from that, so it makes them a little bit more beneficial to use. But I think if you're looking for diversity, you're going to want to get away from those 2 guys in GPPs, which is one of the reasons I like Richards. Drew Hutchison has some decent upside against Baltimore. I don't really love playing guys against Baltimore's offense because they have so much upside. But Hutchison looked really good last time out. He's a strong favorite. I think he's a decent guy to pair with like a Toronto stack and just hope that they put up enough runs and he strikes out enough guys that he pays off that $7,100 price tag, even in a kind of a tough matchup. Chris Medlin's another guy that's interesting. My concern with him, as far as at least GPPs go, is that while he's way underpriced, he hasn't thrown over 80 pitches all year yet. And so you got to think he's probably going to be capped at 85, 90. I think he threw 78 last time out. Yeah. He's looked awesome, though. All of his indicators are great. Sub-3 Sierra rating, 25% strikeout rate. I mean, it all looks good outside of the pitch count. And against the White Sox, you got to feel like that's a pretty good matchup. He's a minus 180 favorite with Kansas City behind him. I mean, he's probably more of a cash game play also, but for 4,700 on DraftKings, I mean, there's some upside even if he only throws 80 pitches.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that's been good before. It's not just a newcomer that's coming out. So, I mean, definitely has the upside. We've seen it before. So, I'm with you there, especially that ridiculously low price tag. He's certainly a guy that's in play. Outside of them, one guy you got to look at that doesn't have a whole lot of upside, but at his cheap price, Joe Kelly's been pitching really well. I'm not sure how much upside he really has at 64 and 66 on the two sites, but been pitching deep into games. Strikeouts really haven't been there. But, I mean, for a guy who's been pitching into the seventh, into the eighth inning even the last two starts, I mean, it's hard not to be somewhat a believer. He's still giving up quite a bit of hard contact, which you don't like, but does have that good offense behind him that should put up a ton of runs against Morgan tonight. So I think he's an okay option. Not sure that he has a ton of upside, though.
Yeah. Another guy that's kind of similar, Tanner Rourke is getting I believe his first start of the season for Washington today. He's 4,200 on DraftKings. He's pretty cheap on FanDuel, too, but I just lost that price here if you want to check that out for me.
I think he's 54.
Okay, so yeah, he's really cheap there too. Facing an Atlanta team that doesn't score a ton of runs, he's a minus 210 favorite. Rourke's a pretty talented guy. He's just been working out of the bullpen a ton, so you got to worry about his pitch count. I don't think he's thrown more than like 50 pitches since, I want to say, April. So you're going to have to worry about pitch count there also. But if he can get 5-6 innings, rack up 5-6 strikeouts, he has similar upside as Medlin, although I prefer Medlin. I think Rourke's going to be way lower owned, but he's just a little bit riskier. You can almost assume Medlin's going to give you 5 or 6. Rourke is a guy that could pitch well and still be out after the fourth inning.
Yeah, that's a good point. So those guys, I mean, you compare both those guys, take your shot in some GPPs with some Coors bats, some other guys you like if you want it. But outside of those guys, there's nobody that really stands out. I mean, obviously you mentioned DeGrom kind of in passing. He still obviously has probably the highest upside of anybody on the slate. But a couple other guys that people may overlook. I like James Shields. The Dodgers have been awful recently. He does have upside. He's been inconsistent though, so that's what makes him a good GPP play. But he is pitching at home against a really, really cold offense. $8,700. We know he has a strikeout upside, so he's a guy I'll throw in a couple tournaments as well and hope for some really low ownership.
Yep.
All right, moving over to catcher. I think your easy top play, but also probably going to be pretty chalky. Buster Posey, disappointed last night, but gets another fly ball. Well, I won't say fly ball, but a lefty that gives up more home runs than he rightfully should. Obviously pitching in Coors Field, so Buster Posey going to be your top option. But as we're talking GPP options, you want guys that are swerves. And a guy that just keeps standing out, that's been hitting very well in the second half, Blake Swihart. It's expensive on both sites, bats eighth, but for guys who bat eighth, he's got some good bats behind him. You got Jackie Bradley, Mookie Betts, 9-1 usually. Those two guys who, I mean, have been hitting well as also. So as far as an 8-hitter, I don't feel like he loses a whole lot of value outside of maybe you won't get that one extra at bat. But this is a guy that's been very good recently.
Yeah, definitely. There's a decent amount of options at the catcher position today. Matt Wieters is 2,600 against Hutchison in Rogers Center. I think there's some nice upside there. John Jaso against Severino again. I mean, Jaso's only 3,000 still. He's probably more of a cash game play, though, with a little bit less power upside than some of these other guys. Jan Gomes against Lobstein. I don't mind in Detroit. I'd prefer if he's hitting above the 7 hole where he's been lately, but he usually gets bumped up at least to the 6 against the lefty. So I'll look at that a little bit. Brian McCann in New York against a righty in Odorizzi. Odorizzi's pretty tough, but as a GPP play, I don't really mind that a ton. And then Alex Avila against Tomlin, I don't mind either for flat minimum for Detroit. He's a little bit low in the lineup also, but I mean, that's just such a cheap price that it's worth considering.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that, you certainly were not considering against Corey Kluber, but he's got that depressed price tag now that he's been scratched. So I'm with you there. I think if you need an absolute minimum guy, fit in some Coors bats, maybe to fit in a couple top-notch pitchers, and I think that's definitely a viable strategy tonight. Moving over to first base here. I mean, for me, the top option is going to be Joey Votto. He's been incredible in the second half, hitting for power, getting on base, but you got to imagine he's going to have a fairly high ownership. So for me, I'm going to look at some other guys off of him, guys like Miguel Cabrera, now against Tomlin and not against Kluber. Way too cheap, despite the fact he hasn't been great recently. And then I'm still going to ride the hot hand with Ryan Zimmerman. I mean, you don't love the matchup against Tehran, who is good against righties, but he's awful on the road somehow. One of those mysteries which just makes no sense. But Zimmerman's got 7 homers and 22 RBI in his last 10 games. So
Yeah.
a fly ball pitcher there. I mean, I'll be riding that train still tonight.
Yeah, definitely. A couple other guys I don't mind. Chris Davis in Toronto, always a great GPP play. I know Hutchison's been good over the last couple starts, but I mean, 4,700 for Davis in that kind of environment just seems like an awesome GPP play to me. Albert Pujols is pretty cheap at 4,200 against a lefty in Perez. Perez has been terrible against righties. Pujols has had some power against lefties all year, much like he's had against everyone. But you got to feel pretty good about that. I don't mind Jose Abreu as a GPP play against Medlin if you're not pitching Medlin. Abreu's been great lately. His numbers against righties are even better than lefties this year. He's come around a ton lately, so he's a guy I'm going to look at quite a bit.
Yeah, and one more guy I'll throw in there. Kendrys Morales just continues to hit well. I'm not one of those BVP guys that's not going to be playing the Royals and is going to be playing John Danks because of past performances. I expect they're going to put up a lot of runs. Vegas does too. 4.5 run total. You assume he'll probably be batting cleanup or 5th. So one of those guys that continues to just be under-owned even in great matchups, and I love this matchup tonight.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, second base options for us here. There's not a whole lot that I love. I mean, if you're playing DraftKings, obviously Ben Zobrist, I think, is the clear-cut top option against John Danks. Not that you're going to disagree with that more than likely because I know you love Zobrist. He's hot.
Yep.
Obviously, Danks struggles with righties, that whole thing. Matt Duffy has second base eligibility, but I know he's hitting in Coors. I think he's the one guy I'm really not going to be playing because he's been horrible against left-handed pitching this season. So what's your take on Matt Duffy?
I mean, he is a little overpriced. Not a guy that I'm absolutely in love with. I mean, he's a fine play. I can't argue with him in Coors against a lefty. But he doesn't have great numbers against lefties. He's been ice cold lately. There's not a lot I really like there outside of just the park factor. It's one of those situations where I'd rather pay 200 less for Zobrist from his great side of the plate against Danks. I mean, it's just a much better matchup, even if the park factor isn't as good. I like some cheap guys at second base. I agree with you. I don't love anyone at the top a ton tonight. Justin Turner still only 3,100, faces Shields. I think he's a fine play. Daniel Murphy against Kohler, assuming he's back in the lineup tonight, is only 4,000. Probably going to hit third. My favorite play is probably Darnell Sweeney for Philly against Joe Kelly, though. He's been great against righties. Probably going to hit leadoff, 2,400. I mean, that's probably the way I'm going to go a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because Spencer and I had a debate earlier on Darnell Sweeney versus John Jaso, straight up FanDuel points. Who do you take? I mean, assuming that they're both batting, I guess cleanup because they probably or not cleanup, leadoff since they both probably will.
Oh man, that's tough.
I know.
I'd probably go Sweeney, honestly.
Thank you, Team Sweeney over here. All right. Either way, we know it was a close one. I had to ask you that one since you had already mentioned both guys, but
that's so tough when they don't play the same position. It makes it so much tougher of a question. But I think I'd go Sweeney.
Yeah. Our rule was just minimum salary guys, not necessarily who to play
over
the other guy. But either way, another guy, Brandon Phillips, Matt Garza has been just god awful. I want pieces of him wherever I can. He's given up a ton of home runs, ton of hard contact. Now, if there's ever a park downgrade for a pitcher for Miller Park, Great American Ballpark's definitely one of them. So, gotta like Phillips there. And then outside of that, I'm gonna go with some cheap guys. Scooter Jeanette's pretty cheap on both sides. You don't love him, but he's cheap. Anthony Rendon against Tehran, the fly ball pitcher. Rendon's been hitting the ball really well recently. Outside of that, I mean, you could look at a guy like Neil Walker, but Carlos Martinez has struggled with lefties, but Walker hasn't been that good. So I think my only other option really I'm looking at is Kelby Tomlinson, although he doesn't have a whole lot of upside, not a lot of power. Third base options, Nolan Arenado is homered in like 30 straight games. Okay, actually it's 4, but it's seemingly every night this guy hits a homer. So, I mean, he's easily your top option. I think Josh Donaldson is an interesting swerve off him, though, because it doesn't matter who he's facing. He's crushing everyone. Waldo Jimenez, one of those mixed bag type of pitchers. You never know what you're going to get, but you know he's not going to dominate you. And Josh Donaldson doesn't get dominated by anyone. So I think tonight might be a great night to swerve off Arenado, especially on DraftKings, to Donaldson in some tournaments.
Yeah, definitely. I like him quite a bit. Probably my favorite third base play is Travis Shaw today. Facing the lefty in Morgan, I think he's going to be avoided a little bit because of the lefty-lefty matchup, but he's absolutely been smoking lefties since he got called up. 406 WOBA, 350 ISO, only 2,900 on DraftKings. I mean, that's a guy that I'm going to play as much as I possibly can at that price. So, I mean, there's no one that I love at the top of third base. Obviously, Donaldson's great. He's 5,500. Obviously, Arenado's great. He's 5,600. I mean, the rest of the guys that are priced halfway decently, like in the 4,000 to 5,000 range, I mean, don't have great matchups. I mean, Cabrera against Tomlin, 4,600 is a pretty good price. I'd probably prefer using him at third than first. And then a couple of these other guys that I was looking at a little bit, like Xander Bogaerts, I much prefer at shortstop. I'm sure we'll get to him in a second. Yep. Also facing Adam Morgan tonight, who's been just, I mean, crushed by everyone. And Bogaerts has been really elite against lefties this year with a 405 WOBA. A couple other guys I like, Danny Valencia against Olmos for Seattle. He's only 3,800. We know how good Valencia is against lefties, 360 WOBA there on the season. A couple other guys that are decent, but I mean, I'm going to be looking a ton at Shaw, Valencia, and then the top most expensive guys for the most part.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to throw out one more guy, another Oakland bat that hits lefties well. Brett Lawrie has been hitting for some power recently.
Yeah.
Nice swerve, because I'm not saying Valencia's going to be really popular, but people will be on him. Laurie's going to be the guy that kind of flies or falls through the cracks, I guess.
Definitely.
Shortstop options, if Brandon Crawford's back in, he does hit lefties very well in that lefty-lefty matchup. I think he'll be low-owned for that reason. Jose Reyes, of course, you're considering, but he is a GPP play, but he's going to be popular, I imagine. Carlos Correa, of course, up top. I think if you're not paying for one of these top guys, I think my favorite is going to be Eugenio Suarez at $3,900 against Garza.
Yeah, I like Bogaerts the most. He's probably going to be my top shortstop play. I mean, a 400 WOBA. He gets overplayed against bad righties a lot because, I mean, his stats against lefties has just boosted his overall stats up so much. But he's just absolutely crushed lefties all year. He's at a 400 WOBA basically all season against lefties. Has been really consistent against them. He's only 3,800. Probably going to hit third against Morgan tonight for the Red Sox. That's probably my top play there. I like Crawford, Correa, Reyes, all those guys at the top. Johnny Peralta at 3,500 against J.A. Happ. I don't ever mind him against a lefty, but he's more of a cash game play. I don't see a ton of upside there. Kelby Tomlinson's only 3,300 still. He's going to be a popular play again. Probably hitting 6 or 7 against De La Rosa, lefty today. Tomlinson's got a 370 WOBA against lefties on the season. If you're looking for like really cheap guys, there's nothing that I'm like super excited about. At least like towards the top of the lineup. I mean, there's playable guys. Like you could look at like Grant Green for the Angels if he's hitting 7, 8, 9. He's probably flat minimum. Has been pretty good against lefties in his minor league career. But I'm probably going to stick to that middle range or the high end of shortstop today.
Yeah, I'm with you there. There's really no one down there, like you said, that has the type of upside you're looking for in tournaments. So, outfield options, we said it yesterday. We'll go ahead and say it again. Play Carlos Gonzalez. I mean, he's going to be about 1,000,000% owned, but his price is still absolutely ridiculous. It was only 4,300 on DraftKings yesterday. Now only 47. So, I mean, if he does anything and you don't have him, you can imagine that everyone else is going to have him. So just go ahead and play him, whether you like it or not. You kind of have to. And you should like it. He's got 4 home runs in the last 48 hours. Also, Lorenzo Cain, once again against a lefty. He's at a ridiculously cheap price on FanDuel, once again at just 3,800. He's 51 on DraftKings, but matching up against John Danks, you can go ahead and fade him on BVP if you want. I will not be. I'll be playing a ton of Lorenzo Cain tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with him whatsoever. I mean, I bring up BVP a decent amount, but 23 at bats is still not going to skew me with a guy that has that kind of stats against a lefty, especially a lefty like John Danks, who just isn't good.
Yep.
I mean, even if he has a bad game tonight, I'm still probably not going to believe that he was a bad play. So I think he's rock solid. I love Mike Trout tonight against lefty and Perez. Him and Pujols is a really strong mini stack for me tonight. I like him quite a bit. Bryce Harper against Tehran. I mean, his on-base percentage is just going to be ridiculous if they keep walking him at this rate. And, I mean, anything you get on top of that is just pure upside, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he got 18 points last night without swinging a bat.
I know, right? That's what I mean. He doesn't even have to swing, and he's going to give you like 12 points every night these days if people keep walking him. And then anytime they pitch to him, he's just going to add to it. So, I mean, you got to love it, especially at 5,000. I mean, that's not a steep price tag at all for a guy with the upside that he has. And speaking of guys with 20 plus at bats and good BVPs, hitting 429 with 5 home runs and 21 at bats against Tehran. Starling Marte is an interesting guy for me. I don't mind any of these Pittsburgh guys against Martinez. I'm not super in love with them, but they're priced down so much because of the tougher matchup that I think they make interesting GPP plays. I mean, McCutcheon's down to 47, and he's been red hot. Marte's down to 41. I'm looking for Polanco's price on FanDuel and DraftKings right now.
I believe he's 3,300 on FanDuel. I'll find him real quick.
I think he's 37 on DraftKings, but
32 on FanDuel.
Okay, cool.
And on DraftKings, he is 33. Oh, that's where it was. It was 33.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, that's way too cheap for how good he's been.
Yep.
I mean, it's not an elite matchup, but I think these guys are going to be sub 5% guys that are not in terrible spots, especially for their prices. Jacoby Ellsbury, I like a lot of these lefty Yankees bats for GPP plays against Odorizzi because, I mean, Odorizzi's pretty good, but he's not a guy that I just totally avoid and you can't get to. And, I mean, the Yankees are another team that seems a little underpriced. I mean, 4,300 for Ellsbury is a great price by himself.
Yep.
A lot of these other Yankees bats. Outside of that, I'll be looking at a lot of cheap guys in the outfield again. That's where I see the most value today. I mean, we mentioned there's not a ton at second base and shortstop like we'd like there to be. But, I mean, you got Shane Peterson hitting first for Milwaukee in Cincinnati against a righty and Sampson that gives up a 426 WOBA to lefties. Carl Crawford's only 2,200 again, facing Shields, who struggled against lefties all year. Daniel Nava, again, still hitting leadoff for Tampa Bay against righties. I mean, their offense really struggles against righties, but getting a leadoff guy for 2,000 is always a pretty decent play for me. And then, of course, my favorite value play of the night, Ryan Rayburn against Lobstein in Detroit for 2,500 is going to be in, I mean, probably pretty close to 100% of my lineups.
Yeah, I like that. And then Johnny Gomes, of course, gets another lefty. He's cheap. Jay Bruce is really cheap, especially on FanDuel if you want to try to pick on Garza. Kyle Parker is really cheap on DraftKings if you want just a cheap piece of Coors Field. And then 2 notes here, 2 guys that could be, well, one guy officially, George Springer was activated from the DL today.
Yeah.
So he's in a good spot if he's in. And then Justin Morneau's with the team but hasn't been activated yet. So if he plays, I mean, he's a crazy cheap value on both sides. You can finally play him and not be forced to play Ben Paulson, who is just simply just not a great player. So
definitely. Yep. I've got probably 2 more guys here. Dominic Brown I like as a GPP play on both sites, assuming he's in the lineup. I want to say he's minimum on FanDuel, 2,700 on DraftKings against Kelly. You mentioned you like Kelly a little bit, so obviously don't play him against Kelly. Yeah. But I think he has some nice upside in the 5-hole. And then Thomas Pham for St. Louis has been hitting second against lefties. And we know how much they've struggled with lefties all year. So I imagine that since he's been hitting well, he's going to stay up there. 3,000 on DraftKings. I want to say he's minimum on FanDuel, too.
He's 27.
27 on FanDuel? Okay, so they started bumping him up then. But I think he's a pretty solid GPP option also against Hap.
Yeah, I like that. And that's going to wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at the F Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.